currently Earth. It was on September 6th in 1522 that one of Ferdinand Magellan's 5 ships, the Victoria, arrives at Sanlúcar de Barrameda in Spain, thus completing the first circumnavigation of the world. The Victoria was commanded by Basque navigator Juan Sebastián de Elcano, who took charge of the vessel after the murder of Magellan in the Philippines in April of 1521. During a long, hard journey home, the people on the ship suffered from starvation, scurvy, and harassment by Portuguese ships. Only Elcano and 21 other passengers survived to reach Spain in September of 1522. On September 20th in 1519, Magellan set sail from Spain in an effort to find a western sea route to the rich spice islands of Indonesia. In command of 5 ships and 270 men, Magellan sailed to West Africa and then to Brazil, where he searched the South American coast for a strait that would take him to the Pacific. He searched the Rio de la Plata, a large estuary south of Brazil, for a way through. Failing, he continued south along the coast of Patagonia. At the end of March in 1520, the expedition set up winter quarters at Port St. Julian. On Easter Day at midnight, the Spanish captains mutinied against their Portuguese captain, but Magellan crushed the revolt, executing one of the captains and leaving another ashore when his ship left St. Julian in August. On October 21st, he finally discovered the strait he had been seeking. The Strait of Magellan, as it became known, is located near the tip of South America, separating Tierra del Fuego and the continental mainland. Only 3 ships entered the passage. One had been wrecked and another deserted. It took 38 days to navigate the treacherous strait, and when ocean was sighted at the other end, Magellan wept with joy. Magellan was the first European explorer to reach the Pacific Ocean from the Atlantic. His fleet accomplished the westward crossing of the ocean in 99 days, crossing waters so strangely calm that the ocean was named Pacific, from the Latin word pacificus, meaning tranquil. By the end, the men were out of food and chewed the leather parts of their gear to keep themselves alive. On March 6 in 1521, the expedition landed at the island of Guam. Ten days later, they dropped anchor at the Philippine island of Cebu. They were only about 400 miles from the Spice Islands. Magellan met with the chief of Cebu, who, after converting to Christianity, persuaded the Europeans to assist him in conquering a rival tribe on the neighboring island of Mactan. In subsequent fighting on April 27th, Magellan was hit by a poisoned arrow and left to die by his retreating comrades. After Magellan continued his eternity, the survivors in 2 ships sailed on the Moluccas and loaded the hulls with spice. One ship attempted unsuccessfully to return across the Pacific. The other ship, the Victoria, continued west under the command of Juan Sebastián de Elcano. The vessel sailed across the Indian Ocean, rounded the Cape of Good Hope, and arrived at the Spanish port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda on September 6 in 1522, becoming the first ship to circumnavigate the globe. The Victoria then sailed up the Guadalquivir River, reaching Seville a few days later. Elcano was later appointed to lead a fleet of 7 ships on another voyage to Moluccas on behalf of Emperor Charles V. He continued his eternity en route via scurvy. September 6 in 1981, President William McKinley, our nation's 25th president, was shaking hands at the Pan American Exhibition in Buffalo, New York, when a 20-year-old anarchist named Leon Czolgosz approaches him and fires 2 shots into his chest. The president rolls slightly on his toes before collapsing forward, saying, quote, "Be careful how you tell my wife," unquote. Czolgosz moved over the president with the intent of firing a 3rd shot, but was wrestled to the ground by McKinley's bodyguards. McKinley, still conscious, told the guards not to hurt his assailant. Other presidential attendants rushed McKinley to the hospital, where they found 2 bullet wounds. One bullet had superficially punctured his sternum, and the other had dangerously entered his abdomen. He was rushed into surgery and seemed to be on the mend by September 12th. Later that day, however, the president's condition worsened rapidly, and on September 14th, McKinley continued his eternity from gangrene that had gone undetected in the internal wound. Vice President at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, was immediately sworn in as our nation's 26th president. Czolgosz, a Polish immigrant, grew up in Detroit and had worked as a child laborer in a steel mill. As a young adult, he gravitated towards socialist and anarchist ideology. He claimed to have killed McKinley because he was the head of what Czolgosz thought was a corrupt government. Czolgosz was convicted and sentenced to death via electric chair. He continued his eternity on October 29th in 1901. The unrepentant killer's last words were, quote, "I killed the president because he was the enemy of the good people, the working people," unquote. His execution was allegedly filmed by Thomas Edison. On September 16th, after receiving a funeral befitting a president in Washington, D.C., McKinley's coffin was transported by train to his hometown of Canton, Ohio, for burial. It was on September 6 in the year 1915 that a prototype tank nicknamed Little Willie rolls off the assembly line in England. Little Willie was far from an overnight success. It weighed 14 tons, got stuck in trenches, and crawled over rough terrain at only 2 miles per hour. However, improvements were made to the original prototype, and tanks eventually transformed military battlefields. The British developed the tank in response to the trench warfare of World War I. In 1914, a British Army colonel named Ernest Swinton and William Hankey, Secretary of the Committee for Imperial Defense, championed the idea of an armored vehicle with conveyor belt-like tracks over its wheels that could break through enemy lines and traverse difficult territory. The men appealed to British Navy Minister Winston Churchill, who believed in the concept of a land boat, and organized, get this, a land ships committee to begin developing a prototype. To keep the project secret from enemies, production workers were reportedly told the vehicles they were building would be used to carry water on the battlefield. Alternate theories suggest the shells of the new vehicles resembled water tanks. Either way, the new vehicles were shipped in crates labeled Tank, and the name stuck. The first tank prototype, Little Willie, was unveiled in September of 1915. Following its underwhelming performance, it was slow, became overheated, and couldn't cross trenches. A second prototype, known as Big Willie, was produced. By 1916, this armored vehicle was deemed ready for battle and made its debut at the First Battle of Somme near Courcelette, France, on September 15th of that year. Known as the Mark I, this first batch of tanks was hot, noisy, and unwieldy, and suffered mechanical malfunctions on the battlefield. Nevertheless, people realized the tank's potential. Further design improvements were made, and at the Battle of Cambrai in November of 1917, 400 Mark IVs proved much more successful than the Mark I, capturing 8,000 enemy troops and 100 guns. And of course, all historic information divulged on this audio file can be verified on history.com.